Okay, so good. We are working our way towards the end of the text. Let me go ahead and get us a little bit grounded in where we were. In the last class, we began this one section that had to do with kind of dedication verses. Again, we're not at the end of the text, but we're at the end of the section that has to do with the conventional bodhicitta. So essentially, we're in the section of verses 96 through 102. And again, what I just read in the meditation were the first two lines of verse 96. We also covered verse 97, these kind of dedication and aspiration prayers at the end of this section, where, again, the main work that we've been doing is to highlight the ways that we need to clearly see the problems of self-cherishing and begin to supplant it with cherishing others. And so we've got a few more verses that pertain to this kind of dedication before we go on to the other topic of ultimate bodhicitta, remembering that, again, that is the mind realizing emptiness directly within the mind, within someone who has bodhicitta, uncontrived bodhicitta, who is on the bodhisattva path. So essentially, we're going to go into that tonight, and then we'll finish it off next week, because this gets into some of the teachings on emptiness. But let's finish off these dedication and aspiration prayers that are in these verses, beginning again with verse 98. So I'll read it from here, and then, as usual, I'll go back to the text from Geshe Jampa Gyatso, his commentary on this that we're using as our way of going through these verses. So it says, as long as we and those who have been our parents, without attaining enlightenment in the abode of Akanishta, due to our actions, wander in the six migrations, may we support one another with a single mind. So this translation, it's perfectly fine, but there were a few parts of it that I thought were a little, might require some clarification. So I have put on the screen as well. The alternate translation that comes from Thupten Jinpa's version of this: until all who have been my parents and I have attained full enlightenment in the Akanishta realm. So until that state has been achieved and I'll talk a little bit more about what Akanishta is in a moment. As we wander the six realms due to our karma, may we all hold each other in our hearts. Again, a single mind, that was mentioned earlier. The idea is that we want to act from the place of singularity, of it being all of us together, all of us in it together, and being dedicated to the welfare of all, rather than coming from a place of just thinking about our own welfare. And so the same sentiment is here in this last line of this version. It just resonates a little more with me. May we all hold each other in our hearts. May we never be without that connection to others that is so central to the bodhisattva path. All right, so let's go then to the text that Geshe Jampa Gyatso prepared. Let me pull that up on the screen here. Okay, so again, the commentary that he has says, by way of this, we pray, in dependence on the conduct of enlightenment, may I and all the sentient beings without exception, who have been my parents, again, because every being has been your parents. This is that meditation of seeing all sentient beings as your mother, your father, those kind beings who have taken care of you. So as long as, with, we're kind of in this realm of existence, maybe we be dedicated based on the bodhisattva conduct for all sentient beings who have been my parents and myself, become unsurpassedly enlightened at the same time in the abode of Akanishta. So again, is it possible for all of us to become enlightened at the same time? Well, again, this kind of harkens back to some of the teachings on bodhicitta that you've encountered before. And I think I may have even mentioned it in a previous class, where there are three different levels of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta that is said to be ruler-like a king or a queen, a ruler that needs to be in that position of ruling in order to enact the welfare of others. This is the thought that we are frequently generating, right? May I become a Buddha so then I can benefit others, just like a ruler of a kingdom then can be totally dedicated to the welfare of the subjects in that kingdom. But then that's, the weakest of these in terms of the courage involved. The next one is captain-like, and this is where you're like the captain of a ship, and you want to get everyone to enlightenment on the boat with you. And that's kind of the sentiment that's being expressed here. May we all at the same time attain enlightenment in this realm of Akanishta. Again, Akanishta is one of these pure lands where you can attain enlightenment. And it's said that all beings, all Buddhas actually do attain enlightenment in pure lands. Eventually, this does have some tantric connections too, such as Vajrayogini's pure land and these other, pure lands that are part of highest yoga tantra. But nonetheless, the idea of you all being there together, all attaining enlightenment at the same time, it's a pretty outrageous thought, but it's really quite impossible to do that. But it's much more courageous to say, I will wait and delay my enlightenment to become enlightened with all of you. In other words, I will hang out in samsara until we can all get to that shore by me being the captain of the ship to lead you all to enlightenment. So we all arrive at the same time. But then the most courageous bodhicitta is shepherd-like or shepherdess-like, a shepherd person, we'll call it. And that's where you are the shepherd or shepherdess who oversees the flock, and you want to make sure that the flock of sheep all get to safety before you retire for the day. And so this is, of course, the most courageous. It's putting your own welfare behind the welfare of others. And of course, that is, not, it also is impossible to happen, right? Because how can we truly help others and get them to enlightenment if we aren't enlightened ourselves? So while you have those three types, it's actually only through the ruler-like method that we actually become enlightened. You have to become that king or queen who is overseeing the kingdom, and then you can lead all beings to enlightenment. But nonetheless, we want to generate a mind that is like the shepherd that will put everyone else's welfare first, that we will gladly hang back and continue to be in samsara to keep doing the work for others, to get them to enlightenment. And as long as we can get all of them to enlightenment, then we will finally go to enlightenment ourselves. They actually say if you have that level of courageous mind, you become enlightened even more quickly, because that is extremely powerful, that courage that you have to do that. So again, this realm of Akanishta that I mentioned is taught in both Sutra and Tantra, but it's actually a part of the form realm where you go and you are in the presence of a Buddha, achieve enlightenment on the basis of that experience and being there and what have you. Don't need to really say too much more about that, but it's essentially a pure land. Akanishta literally translates to above all or not below. That there's nothing above it. You're above all of those other realms. This is said to be one of these realms again where beings can attain enlightenment by taking rebirth in those pure realms. And as I said, even those beings who are in the human realm, at some point they do need to be in Akanishta to achieve final enlightenment. Then it says also, as long as we have not attained that, we pray, may all the sentient beings who wander due to their actions in the six migrations as gods, humans, demigods or anti-gods, and so forth. The other ones that aren't included are the animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings. May all of these beings pacify thoughts of hatred and the like toward each other, and then wholeheartedly support each other with a single mind, with a mind that is intent upon the same goal, that is of one thought, all of a single mind in that way, holding each other in our hearts, as was said in that other translation. May they help one another reciprocally to quickly complete the great waves of the enlightened conduct. So this is a very powerful aspirational prayer, kind of like may we all just be totally dedicated to each other's welfare and live our lives with the hope that we can all attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. Of course, the world that we live in doesn't necessarily allow for that thought to come to fruition, but it's a wonderful thought to make, right? That's what most of these aspirational prayers are about, is sort of setting the sights on what we would ideally like to have happen. So let's go on to verse 99. This is a continuation of these prayers. When for even the welfare of a single migrating being, we fully enter the three bad migrations, the ones that I just added of animal realms, pretas or hungry ghosts, and then the hell beings. May we extricate them from the suffering of the bad migrations without degenerating the conduct of the great beings. In other words, may we, for a single migrating being, whoever they are, May we gladly, willingly enter into any of these lower realms to remove them from the suffering of the bad migrations by being dedicated to our bodhisattva conduct and so on, and help them beyond that even. But the idea here is to at least get them out of the, the bad migrations, the places where they experience unbelievable suffering. So there will be a few verses I'm going to share that are similar to this. I'll go back to the slides in a moment, but let's go ahead and go through what Geshe-la says on this. He says, we pray, when practicing the great waves of the conduct of bodhisattvas, may I possess the desire to go to the abodes of the three bad migrations for the welfare of all migrating sentient beings, for as little as even one louse existing on my body. So, if have even, I mean, lice we can see to some degree, but even if you talk about, these beings who live on our eyelashes and on the hairs on our body and, on our fingers and our armpits, and all these beings who are, part of our body, living with our body, off of our body, any of these small beings that seem so insignificant that no doubt we kill every day through our actions, even one of those small beings, we would gladly go to any of the three bad migrations for the welfare of that being, to help them, to bring them to good behavior, to fulfilling the path, to whatever. I mean, everything that is entailed in getting them to a state of well-being. And fully enter the bad migrations joyfully and delightedly, like entering a pleasant garden of the higher states. So they often use this analogy of like, yeah, how you want to have this joy that is like, I think Shantideva in another verse, I'm going to share one with you that's about a swan, but in another one, he has like an elephant that is in the hot sun, but is diving into, immersing itself in a water hole where it's just being totally refreshed. We would want to have the same joyful attitude of going into the lower realms for the sake of these beings, even just one being. So then it says, having entered them, entered these rebirths, since the conduct of the great beings is only for the welfare of others, may I extricate migrating beings from the sufferings of the three bad migrations, along with their causes, by means of not degenerating even slightly from that very conduct, making sure we are upholding all the bodhisattva behavior, all of the bodhisattva vows, and all of our actions. May I alone definitely extricate them without seeking help from anyone. Again, that's speaking to that strong motivation that is part of our bodhicitta, that we want to always have that mind that we will do it, whatever it takes, even if it is ourselves alone, even if it is entirely resting on our own shoulders. So again, I mentioned that there are a couple of verses that are similar to this from other texts in our tradition. One is from the Lama Chopa. Lama Chopa, or the Guru Puja, is done frequently. It actually was done today with Venerable Rabina, but I was eating my meal, so I couldn't attend that today. But this is the verse on enthusiasm or joyous effort. It says, even if I must remain for an ocean of eons in the fiery hells of Avicii. Avicii is said to be the worst of the hell realms, therefore the worst realm of physical suffering that we have to endure in samsara. For the sake of even just one sentient being, I seek your blessings to complete the perfection of enthusiasm that out of compassion untiringly strives for supreme enlightenment. So again, this is a type of mentality that we're talking about in this aspirational prayer. May I have that level of aspiration that I would gladly go into the worst hell for an ocean of eons for the sake of even just one being. Now, will you have to do that? Probably not, but that's the level of courage we have to have. I was talking earlier about the shepherd person like courage, but this is an unbelievable courage and enthusiasm that is willing to do that. Then there's a verse from Shantideva, again, that where he talks about it being like a swan entering into a pool. One whose continuum is familiarized in this way, around developing bodhicitta, because that's what a good part of chapter 8 is about. Since he takes joy in pacifying others' sufferings, this bodhisattva will enter even relentless torment, which is another name for Avicii that was in the previous verse, this worst place of suffering in all of samsara, just as a swan enters a lotus pool. So again, that type of attitude that we would want to have, where we would just gladly, willingly, joyfully go to a lower realm to benefit even just one being. So pretty tough to get there, but we all can. All the Buddhas of the present, past, future were like us and developed this mind and eventually achieved that. So we're making that aspiration that we might be able to do that as well. Now we go into verse 100, and it says, "May the guardians of hell immediately develop the discrimination of us as lamas upon seeing us go into that hell realm. May those guardians who inflict harm on beings in that realm, may they immediately see us as lamas. May they have a total change of their mind to seeing, us as those who can benefit them and that they want to move their minds in the Dharma. May their weapons also transform into a rain of flowers." This harkens back to the whole story that's told of the Buddha's enlightenment with the Maras shot arrows at the Buddha and they became a rain of flowers. So may, we have that effect of transforming what is weapons of hatred and anger into weapons of love and compassion, or not weapons, but you know what I mean, kind of transforming them into flowers, into something beautiful that's motivated by love, compassion, concern. Free from harm, may they be refreshed by peace and happiness. May we bring those beings to a more peaceful, contented state. So let's go ahead and go to Geshe-la's text and go through this verse, the commentary on this verse. Again, this idea of the guardians of hell, we'll talk about that in a moment. There's some texts that seem to say that the guardians of hell are a karmic creation, that the beings that are born there create that. It's not that those are actually sentient beings who are born in the hell realms as a guardian of hell. It's not like you come into hell as a ordinary hell being and you get promoted to being a guardian of hell, that you can inflict torture on others. But there are other texts that say that they actually are sentient beings that are born into those positions of being guardians of hell. I mean, what horrible thing that is, because then you're not only uh, creating negative thoughts while you're in hell, but you're creating negative actions by harming other beings. But anyway, if such beings do exist, these would be pretty horrible beings within these hell realms who are inflicting pain on other beings who are born there. So as it says then, as has been just explained above, we say, when I intrepidly enter onto the blazing incandescent iron foundation of the hells for the sake of sentient beings, immediately may the wicked guardians of hell, their harmful mind having been pacified, develop the discrimination of me as their Lama. I mean, again, what an amazing transformation if they were able to, you know, instead of seeing you as just another being in the hell realms to inflict pain upon, they actually saw you as, oh, you're my Lama, my guru, I want to learn from you. I want to develop the Dharma in my own mind. With a mind of clear faith and respect, may those hell guardians let fall a rain of weapons that transforms into a rain of flowers. In addition to there not being even the slightest harm to the bodies of those sentient beings, may they find the happiness of coolness, and in particular, may their continuum be thoroughly refreshed by the final coolness, peace, the happiness of the mind of unsurpassed enlightenment. So Geshe-la mentions both the coolness of having the heat of the hot hells pacified, because the hell of Avicii is in the hot hells, which are the places of the greatest suffering. But anyway, the idea is that may that happen in a more temporal way, but may they also have the final coolness, the ultimate coolness, the pacification of the afflictions and suffering in their own minds, and the eventual happiness of unsurpassed enlightenment, Buddhahood, which is the complete removal of all of the obstructions so that they then can, know their full potential. So I don't think there was much more to share on that verse in terms of any other slides. I don't really have too many additional slides to show tonight until we get into the next section and we start talking about bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So let's go on to verse 101. May even the beings in the bad migrations attain clairvoyance and the Dharanis. I'll talk a bit about what Dharanis and a little on clairvoyance in a moment. Then take the body of a god or human and generate bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. May they repay our kindness with the Dharma, meaning with their practice of the Dharma, and having taken us as their Lama, rely upon us. So clairvoyances are qualities that are attained as one progresses on the path, especially through the power of deep meditative concentration. And these clairvoyances allow you to know the minds of others, to be able to see things from a great distance, hear things from a great distance, what have you. They are powers that can be attained. And when they are attained by those on the Mahayana path, of course, they become of great benefit in the ability for them to help others. But they are quite an accomplishment, again, that we all can attain at some point or another on our path. Dharani, the word Dharani is actually, let me go ahead and go to the slides because I do have a little slide to share on that. It's oftentimes equated with a form of mantra. But it also has some meanings in terms of it being a state of retention, being able to retain things. By the way, this is the alternate translation I decided to share on this one. Let me read that quickly and then I'll go to the slide on Dharanis. May the beings of the lower realms too obtain clairvoyance and mantra. Again, Dharani was translated as mantra by Thupten Jinpa. And may they attain human or celestial birth and generate bodhicitta. May they repay my kindness through spiritual practice, and may they take me as their teacher and rely upon me. So this was from our study of Maitreya's ornament in the master's program. There are 4 types of retention: retention of patience, retention of secret mantra, retention of words, and retention of meanings. A retention, which is the translation of this Sanskrit word dharani, is also a mantra. Retention has to be either a mindfulness or wisdom that retains the words and meanings heard. So again, I can't say much more about it. I don't have much more knowledge about it than what we discussed in the ornament studies over in Italy. But it's essentially an accomplishment that allows you to be able to retain the meanings and the words of what has been said to you. So if you're at a teaching, you would remember every single word. You know, someone would say, "Oh, what did Don say in regard to verse 101?" And you'd be able to repeat it verbatim. you know, so this is quite an amazing skill, and it said that many of the followers of the Buddha had this ability, and that's why the teachings were kept alive and transmitted orally from disciple to disciple, or teacher to disciple, because there were those who taught the Dharma after the Buddha. But anyway, the idea is that that was how we have these teachings, is because they were retained in the minds of beings, and then they were repeated to those who eventually wrote them down, sometimes centuries after the Buddha's death. So anyway, this is what we mean by this, of the encouraging them to attain these various accomplishments, these clairvoyances and dharanis. Again, I won't go much more into the clairvoyances, but there again are usually 5 of them that are more accessible along the path, and then a 6th one that is attainable at a certain level of the path. But nonetheless, these would be very useful for us to have these sorts of skills. And so we're wanting sentient beings who are leaving the bad migrations to have these. So in addition, we pray, do to me, may the sentient beings of the bad migrations, while abiding in those, obtain even in this very instant the many good qualities of the dharanis, clairvoyances, and so forth. May they quickly transfer their lives from there and immediately obtain the completely pure bodily support of manifest highness, that of a god or a human. An ideal rebirth, and again, to practice the Dharma and to attain great accomplishments. Human rebirth is said to be the most ideal, but nonetheless, there are gods who do have the practice of the Dharma and who can receive Dharma in that realm. On that support, without striving for the sake of the hearer or solitary realizer enlightenments, meaning not going for the goal of simply one's own individual liberation, which is the goal of the Hinayana, or the fundamental vehicle, may they instead generate the mind of supreme and unsurpassed enlightenment, bodhicitta, in dependence on their trying to properly practice the conduct of the 6 perfections, which are the means that the bodhisattva engages in to develop their minds, and the 4 means of gathering disciples, which are the things that they do to benefit others. May they also, by means of the Dharma of the great waves of conduct of the conqueror's children, repay all my previous kindness of extricating them from the abodes of the bad migrations. So by means of their practice of the Dharma, may that be how they repay our kindness. When we do that for them, bring them extricate them out of the lower realms, help them to develop all these amazing qualities, train them in developing bodhicitta. May they repay our kindness by being dedicated to the practice of the Dharma. That's how we're kind of envisioning ourselves as being the guides and the leaders of these beings, as we saw earlier. May they see us as their lama and so on. Well, now we want them to repay that kindness of being their guide, being their lama, by practicing the Dharma, which is what every teacher wants. They don't really want any monetary offerings or any of the other service or things that sentient beings give them. Those things come in handy and they are helpful. But the main goal for any teacher is for those beings who are being taught to practice, to repay kindness by their practice. By means of my also unmistakably teaching them the path, may I act as their Lama. By also considering me to be their Lama, may their way of relying on me be unmistaken, and before long, may they culminate their progress on the grounds and paths. So again, this one I think is pretty clear in terms of, what we're wishing for these beings. We're making strong aspirations, but you'll notice how, it's not really so much about may I, other than may I benefit these beings. So it really is in the spirit of abandoning the self-cherishing and what have you, and being dedicated to helping others, helping all of them to achieve the goals that they seek. So let's go on to verse 102. Also, at that time, may all the migrating beings of the high states fully meditate on selflessness just like us, and then, free from conceptualization, recognize existence and peace as being equal. So this is the last verse of these dedication verses, and it's kind of a segue into ultimate bodhicitta, because here we're not just wishing for sentient beings to generate conventional bodhicitta and all of the other things that lead to that. We're wanting them to develop ultimate bodhicitta. We're wanting them to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness. Having taken rebirth in high status as a god or a human, may they meditate on selflessness, emptiness. Again, these two are interchangeable. By selflessness, we don't mean selfless in the way that we often talk about in our culture. We mean without an inherently existent identity, which is true of all things, not just people, but all phenomena. So all phenomena have a fictitious sense of self that we are imputing, and we need to realize the emptiness of that doesn't exist on those with those phenomena. So we want them to fully meditate on selflessness, and then free from any of the conceptualizations, the ignorance that grasps at inherent existence. May they see samsara and nirvana, existence and peace, as being equal in terms of them both being empty of inherent existence. So let's see what Geshe-la says on this, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about it before we go on to the next section then and start working with ultimate bodhicitta. Geshe-la says, like this, we say, at that time of my enacting the welfare of migrating beings, may not only the migrating beings of the bad migrations, but also the migrating beings included in the high states, fully meditate a completely pure wisdom, realizing selflessness, just like my own conduct. Then, free from conceptualization regarding either the happiness of existence or the happiness of one-sided peace, may they, by means of the non-conceptual exalted wisdom realizing selflessness or emptiness, and without attachment to either of them, either samsara or peace, nirvana, so we don't want them to have the happy attachment to the happiness of samsara or the happiness of one-sided peace, this solitary peace that is nirvana. May they recognize existence and peace as being alike, in that, except for being mere appearances, they are entirely not established from their own side. In other words, may existence and peace be identified as they really are. So again, this idea of seeing things, samsara and nirvana, as equal means that they are equal in terms of both of them lacking any inherent existence. And of course, that's why samsara can be changed, transformed into the state of nirvana. But, obviously there is a difference conventionally between these two states. If someone had a choice between, should I continue to be in samsara under the control of my karma and delusions, experiencing all the varieties of suffering, or would I like to be free from all of those causes of suffering and experience the peace of my mind being free from delusions and no longer experiencing pain, difficulty, anything that's conditioned? Well, of course, this is a much preferable option. So there is a difference in terms of these conventionally, but in terms of their ultimate nature, just in regard to everything, whether we talk about samsara, nirvana, we talk about computers, people, animals, chairs, whatever, all phenomena are equal in taste in regard to their emptiness, because there is not a single phenomenon that has any inherent existence. And this, of course, is where we're going to be going into in terms of these next set of verses, is to discuss in more detail Dharma Rakshita's advice about realizing emptiness, and of course using some of the things we've heard, many of us, in other teachings, especially the teachings on dependent arising as the means to realize emptiness. So this verse is, again, a sort of closing verse for getting us into the final section with that final dedication. May they all meditate on selflessness, emptiness. And again, it was included in Geshe-la's commentary, not just those beings that have been reborn in the high states, but even the beings in the bad rebirths. It could be very hard for beings in the bad rebirths to meditate on emptiness. Can I get my cats to realize emptiness? Maybe if I'm a really skilled bodhisattva or a Buddha, I might have better luck. But right now, I don't think they're going to do much meditation on emptiness. But nonetheless, the idea here is that may all beings achieve this wisdom. May they know this wisdom and, free from any of the distorted states of looking at things, see the equality of everything in emptiness, that all phenomena lack any inherent existence, which is, of course, the view of what's called, again, the Prasangika Madhyamika, the consequence middle way school, which is the highest thought of the Buddha, the one that goes to the greatest lengths to refute inherent existence, rather than to rely upon some mode of existence that the lower schools all still adhere to. So again, this is the highest point of view that's being taught here. Again, there's qualms about Dharma Rakshita, what level or what sort of tenets he followed. Again, the class that Venerable George is doing on Friday mornings is all about these tenet systems. And it's only this highest system, Prasangika Madhyamaka, the consequence middle way school, that goes to this length of teaching this very subtle form of selflessness or emptiness. But anyway, this is the idea that Dharma Rakshita certainly is teaching it here, it seems, is giving some credence to this idea of realizing that degree of emptiness, selflessness. So this does take us then into ultimate bodhicitta, verses 103 through 116. And then we have one final verse that's dedicating the merits at the final end of this, because we already had, again, a bit of a dedication that we just went through, those aspirational prayers and dedications. So let's go on to talk about these. I'm going to refresh your memory in terms of these twin demons. And I apologize if this is a little repetitive. We've been seeing them come up throughout our text, but recall that the first part of the text, if you go back to that slide, verses 1 through 102, were primarily about generating conventional bodhicitta as the antidote to the mind of self-cherishing, whereas ultimate bodhicitta is the antidote to the mind of self-grasping. These are the two demons, Gongpo Ni, the twin demons that all of our Lojong texts, this text is part of Mahayana mind training, Lojong, and these are the two things that are targeted, that are wanting to be gotten rid of, to annihilate, to at least reduce their tendency to arise in our minds. So self-cherishing is a grosser form, again, that is quite involved in our day-to-day behavior, does manifest in some subtler ways for those on the Hinayana path that still don't see the need to go beyond their own welfare and achieve that solitary peace that we were just talking about. But then self-grasping is the deeper error that we are all under the control of. This is the ignorance that is grasping at ourselves as well as all phenomena to exist inherently. So just to review briefly the definitions of these were from Thupten Jinpa's Essential Mind Training Glossary. It's also in the larger collection of mind training that he translated. Self-cherishing is the deeply ingrained thought that cherishes the welfare of your own self and makes you oblivious to others' well-being. And again, it can be at the grosser forms where it's generally together with our self-grasping. But then even those who have gotten rid of the self-grasping, such as those on the Hinayana path that have become foe destroyers, arhats, they still have a very subtle form of self-cherishing that makes them oblivious to the well-being of others. And they can sort of check out of samsara and go into a state of solitary peace on the basis of that very subtle self-cherishing. But we have it at a much grosser form in our lives, certainly, and this is where we're trying to primarily combat it through all of the things we've looked at up to this point. Self-grasping is defined as instinctively believing in the intrinsic existence of your own self, the person, as well as the external world. And these, of course, speak to the two types of selflessness that we need to realize. The selflessness of persons, which starts with realizing that for oneself, the I. And then, of course, we can translate that to other beings that see that all persons as empty of inherent existence. That's the selflessness of persons. And then selflessness of phenomena is everything else that exists. And of course, the external world, everything that is not a person would be a bigger category of that. But the idea is that we do currently have a sense of grasping at the inherent existence of all phenomena, both the persons, ourselves, and other people, as well as everything that is not a person. All the other phenomena, our computers, our pets, well, our pets would be persons. What else? Food, music, whatever it is in our lives. We believe in the intrinsic existence of these things. So this, again, is the deeper error we're trying to get at. And as I said earlier, conventional bodhicitta is the antidote to the first obstacle, self-cherishing. Ultimate bodhicitta, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness directly in the mind of a bodhisattva, being with uncontrived conventional bodhicitta. This is what will remove self-grasping, will annihilate self-grasping. Conventional bodhicitta, again, is the altruistic intention to attain enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings, which, of course, is a product of our cherishing others. That's why we spent the whole first 102 verses looking primarily at how do we combat that mind that is focused on ourselves and replace it with the mind that is dedicated to others, exchanging self and others. Ultimate bodhicitta is the wisdom directly realizing emptiness that is inspired by that altruistic intention that is together with it. It's, the main mind is realizing emptiness, but it's together with a being who has developed bodhicitta in that uncontrived way, that conventional bodhicitta that was just on the screen. Ultimate bodhicitta is developed by the bodhisattva using many analyses, among them dependent arising, which is called the king of reasonings. And we'll go into this in more detail because one of the verses coming up goes right into that whole topic of dependent arising and how we realize emptiness through that reasoning. So I will go into that in more detail coming in this text and the slides to come. So we first have verse 103, which is a standalone verse, and then all the others fit into the remainder of this section. It is a verse that says how the results of practice will be attained ultimately, how we will eventually attain the goal of Buddhahood and our ability to benefit others in that state through the wisdom realizing emptiness, because that is the main means by which we achieve that. Though, of course, we need conventional bodhicitta and all the practices motivated by that to be a part of that. You need, again, the two wings of a bird, the two wings of both method, compassion, what have you, bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, as well as the wing of wisdom, which is the ultimate bodhicitta, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So let's look at verse 103. So if we do that, if we, follow this advice that was being set out in terms of these aspirational prayers, we will destroy this enemy. If we do that, we will destroy conceptualizations. Having familiarized with the non-conceptual exalted wisdom of selflessness, why would we not attain the causes of the form body and their result? So if we put all the causes into place, without a doubt, the result will ensue. It will come. But this is the whole idea of this again follows from that verse that we had, verse 102, where we were talking about getting all beings to realize selflessness. And so if we do that, if we ourselves, as well as all beings do that, then we will be rid of all the conceptualizations that are keeping us trapped in samsara. And having familiarized with this non-conceptual, this direct wisdom, realizing selflessness, emptiness, we will eventually attain the results of Buddhahood. That's what this whole course that I was teaching on Wednesday nights in Santa Fe was all about, was the grounds and paths that lead you to attaining that goal of enlightenment, and all of the realizations of emptiness that take place, and the requisite merit that is accumulated that allows you to progress on that path to eventually attain that state. But this verse is essentially saying, if you dedicate yourself to this and do all of this and generate the antidote to self-grasping, which again is the deeper error of those two demons, the twin demons, then you will without a doubt attain the state of enlightenment. You know, there is that phrase that if you've created the causes, then there's no way the result won't come. You know, even if you don't want the result to come, if you've created the causes, the result will come. You know, and this, of course, is the problem, is right now sentient beings, due to their ignorance, are creating the causes for their own suffering and not recognizing that they are the ones who are contriving it, the ones putting it together. You know, they are the masters of their own experiences. And of course, if we put all of our effort into creating the causes for Buddhahood, for enlightenment, there's no way that goal won't arrive. It will definitely come to fruition. And of course, the one that's highlighted here is the form body. When we talk about the experience of a Buddha, we can talk about two main bodies, and that don't mean physical body necessarily here. We mean a part of their experience, a component of their experience. One is what we call the truth body, or the Dharmakaya, which is the ripening of the mind of that bodhisattva into the state of omniscience, the mind of a Buddha. The other one is the form bodies, and the form bodies are said to be, in this context in particular, but generally in the Mahayana, they are the main result we want to achieve, right? Because when we generate conventional bodhicitta, we say, may I become enlightened, but why? The primary reason is for the sake of other sentient beings. That's what the form bodies allow you to do. That's your interpersonal dimension that allows you to benefit other sentient beings. But the first part of it, the truth body, is what you achieve through wishing to become enlightened yourself in order to accomplish that. So the main goal for a bodhisattva is to get those form bodies, get those ways that you can manifest for other beings so you can help them on their path. But to get to the form bodies, you need the truth body. You need to develop your omniscient mind to have the capacity to help all sentient beings to that degree. So this is why the form bodies are being spelled out here, is because that is the main goal for a bodhisattva, is to achieve the ability to benefit all sentient beings with a perfect form that will act exactly in accord with their karma. So let's look at verse 103, commentary from Geshe-la. He says, by viewing self-cherishing, as explained many times before, to be our enemy, if we properly practice the methods for ceasing it, we will destroy this enemy. That's the first line. We will destroy the enemy of self-cherishing. But if we practice as has also been explained before, we will destroy conceptualizations. In other words, if we practice developing the antidote to self-grasping, the wisdom realizing emptiness, then we will destroy all of the mistaken conceptualizations that are adhering to things as if they existed from their own side, inherently, intrinsically, all these ways that we talk about that false object that we are grasping at. Then Geshe-la says, furthermore, without considering the criteria for something to be a conceptualization, conceptualizations here in this second line are taken to be self-cherishing and the bad conceptions produced by it. If we practice method, the non-conceptual exalted wisdom of great bliss, and wisdom, the second wing, the exalted wisdom realizing selflessness, in this way, why would we not attain the uncommon causes that accomplish the form body, as well as their result, the form body? As we will attain the causes for that, and we will attain the result of that, which is the form body, which, as I said, is the main objective of the bodhisattva, because they want to benefit others. That's why bodhisattvas are dedicated to the path to enlightenment, not for their own sake of their own attainment of enlightenment, the truth body, but rather the attainment of the form bodies that allow them to skillfully help all other beings. If all the causes are complete, Geshe-la says, the arisal of the result cannot be stopped. Therefore, the form body will definitely be attained once we put all those causes into place. One thing I want to point out before we take a break, I mean, I did mention that conceptualizations in that context were self-cherishing and the bad conceptions produced by it. We would want to include within there, of course, because this whole section is moving us into ultimate bodhicitta, self-grasping, which is mentioned in some texts, but it isn't in Geshe-la's commentary. But of course, self-cherishing and self-grasping, as we've seen many times in this text, because they are twin demons, one might be mentioned, but the other one is implicitly there. These are always arising in our minds right now together. In those who have abandoned self-grasping on the Hinayana path, they would still have some subtle form of self-cherishing, as I mentioned earlier. But essentially, for most of us, these two are arising together. So that verse that said, again, if we do that, we will destroy conceptualizations. We can say that we will not only destroy self-cherishing, but we will destroy self-grasping. So if we do, again, engage in the dedicated work to realize this exalted wisdom of selflessness, we will attain the results. Now, one other thing I want to point out before the break is that it mentions here in parentheses, method being equated to the non-conceptual exalted wisdom of great bliss, and wisdom being equated to the exalted wisdom realizing selflessness. Now, from a sutra presentation, we would say method is more the practice of the perfections together with bodhicitta. I mean, the development of merit, all the things that, are involved in that side of the path. In this presentation, because this does have tantric references throughout it, we've seen that in a number of places so far in our studies. Here it is being given a tantric definition of what method means. It doesn't mean that you don't also practice the six perfections and have bodhicitta and develop merit in that way. But the main technique for developing that side of the path in highest yoga tantra is the non-conceptual exalted wisdom of great bliss. And again, this goes beyond the scope of this course to get into talking about all of that, but essentially this is the blissful state of mind that is together with the wisdom realizing emptiness. And when those two are united in a single moment of mind, they become a very powerful cause for achieving Buddhahood very, very quickly. That's why the tantric path is said to be the quick path, because what is taught in Tantra is an accelerated way of using this technique of uniting bliss and emptiness. So again, that's just one thing I wanted to point out on that, because some of you may wonder, well, what is this? I've heard about, selflessness, but I don't know about this wisdom of great bliss. What is that all about? Again, I can't go into any more detail as part of this course, but know that this is how it is taught in highest yoga tantra, is that through the technique of deity yoga, seeing yourself as a Buddha and doing various yogas that are working with subtle energies in the body, you generate a great bliss that is together with the mind realizing emptiness. This is the causes for what are called the illusory body and the clear light mind. And these two get united into the state of Buddhahood. So again, the tantric path is very complex and again, way beyond the scope of this course. But nonetheless, Geshe-la, in his kindness, threw in some references to Tantra because, as I said, we've been working the whole time with Yamantaka, which is not a sutra being. This is a tantric being. This is a highest yoga tantra being. And so there's wanting to be those points of reference throughout the text that relate this to the sutra path as well. But obviously, most of what we've been talking about is sutra, not tantra. So, all right, let's take a little break. If you do have any questions, we'll maybe take those when we return, but be sure to write them down or remember them. You can put them in the chat box if you wish. I have 7:05 here, so let's say 7:15. And how's the puppy, Eloise? Jack? Oh, you have to unmute.
Oh, this is the time of night that he goes insane.
Oh, no. I saw the pictures that Adrian posted of the furniture damage.
Right. Oh, and this time of night, he just pees all over the house. He's all during the day, he's really good about going outside, but he just falls apart. And he's just like, he's just like a little kid. I'm not tired. I'm not tired. I'm not tired. And he just goes crazy and then passes out.
Wow.
But right now he's in the go crazy. place.
Maybe you need a crate for him.
We got a crate. He does,
Do
and
you?
he
Oh,
sleeps.
okay.
Yeah, he sleeps in a crate, and he has a big crate that sometimes when I'm here alone,
Uh-huh.
I put him in that big crate this time of night
Uh,
because then he
uh,
doesn't just go berserk, baby.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, they're a handful. Patrick was talking about getting a puppy, and I'm like, then you take care of the puppy. I don't want to be dealing with it.
Right.
The last dog we had, Patrick was working then full time during the day, and so I was at home with the puppy and had to deal with all of the craziness. So anyway, okay, let's carry on. Were there any questions up to this point in terms of things I've talked about so far, up through verse 103? Okay, you might want to remute yourself,
Oh yeah,
Eloise. Just
yeah. You heard my
okay.
big sigh.
Yeah.
Fine.
All right, so let's carry on then. Let's go back to the text. Well, actually, let's go to the uh, slides, and we see that, oh, there was this little chart. I just wanted to go through this again. I had shown this chart previously. I don't remember in relation to which verse, but it is in the Good Karma book by Venerable Thupten Chodron, and it's actually in relation to verse 103, which again, she has different numbering of the verses, but it's that same verse. And this kind of gives you an idea of the basis on the left-hand side, where things start in terms of what we're working with, sort of the ground of our behavior, which is conventional truths and ultimate truths. Conventional truths being everything that exists that is not emptiness, and ultimate truths being the emptiness of all of those things that exist. The aspect of the path that we practice in relation to each of those is method. With regard to conventional truths, this is why we practice generosity and other acts and what have you. That's all part of our compassionate method. And then, of course, wisdom, the other wing that is based on ultimate truths, on the emptiness of phenomena. What they combat in terms of the principal enemies that we have been talking about in this text are the self-centered attitude or self-cherishing in regard to method, and the self-grasping ignorance, that is in regard to wisdom. The main practices for the first are renunciation, compassion, bodhicitta, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, patience, whatever, all these various things. Meditation on emptiness is what we practice in relation to ultimate truths, and of course the analyses that lead to a correct view of emptiness. The collection that is attained by virtue of that is the collection of merit, or the accumulation of merit through the method side that is based on conventional truths, and the accumulation of wisdom that is collected in regard to ultimate truths. The final result are the form bodies. This is what comes from our practice of compassionate method. Our desire to be a benefit to others is to develop the form bodies, what are called the enjoyment body and the emanation body, that are the two main ways, or the two actual ways, final ways, that the Buddha is able to engage in helping others. The enjoyment bodies are those ones that are in Akanishta, in those pure lands. And only bodhisattvas who have developed direct realization of emptiness have access to them. Whereas emanation bodies are the variety of ways that Buddhas appear for our benefit, even as inanimate objects, bridges and cars and whatever might be needed by sentient beings. But essentially, these are the forms that Buddhists take in order to benefit others, that are based on all of those practices and various things that are in that top row. In the bottom row, of course, it leads to the truth body, which is the Buddha's own personal experience of an omniscient mind. When I talk about these last two things in that last column, the resultant body of a Buddha, sometimes I relate them to kind of what we have now, right? Every one of us has what we call our social dimension and our more private personal dimension. And our private personal dimension, of course, is our own awareness. As much as we might express our thoughts or our feelings to other people, we still have that domain that is just our own, right? No one else has real access to it per se. Of course, Buddhas have access to it because they know our minds, but nonetheless, that's sort of our private experience, our personal experience. That ripens into the truth body of a Buddha, the exalted wisdom of a Buddha. Our social dimension, which is, of course, what we all have as well, maybe not to the degree we had it before the pandemic, but we still have those that we relate to and are embodied so that we can, be involved with them and help them and talk to them, what have you. That's also there for a Buddha. A Buddha doesn't lose that interpersonal or social dimension. They have their personal experience of the truth body. They have their interpersonal or social dimension, which is the form bodies. And of course, that's the main goal, as I said earlier tonight, because the Buddhas want to help others. They need to be embodied to help others. We can't relate to the wisdom mind of a Buddha. It's untouchable for us. We can't grasp it. We can't get at it. We can't relate to it. But we can relate to the form body of a Buddha, where that Buddha becomes physical form that can then, help us on our path. So that's the idea behind these. And again, you can take a look at that chart if you have the book, or again, it'll be in the slides from tonight, the presentation slides that have been going out. Okay, so now we enter into the section of 104 through 114. I guess there actually are a few more verses that I thought that this next section led us all the way to the end of the ultimate bodhicitta, but it doesn't. It's a large section, 11 verses. All appearances are empty of inherent existence is the title of this outline. But it's essentially getting at the fact that we need to realize emptiness. And of course, the primary way that we do that is introduced in verse 104. Aha, Dhammarakshita says, all these are dependent relations or dependent originations. Dependent or dependent arisings. Dependent relations are dependent and not self-sustaining. Changing back and forth, they are illusory false appearances. Like a whirling firebrand, they are reflections that appear. They are just things that appear to have some sort of inherent or intrinsic existence, but they actually don't. And in the next verse, we're going to go into a number of examples of that show kind of how things can appear to exist in one way, but actually don't exist in that way. Let's talk a little bit about, before we go to Geshe-la's commentary, a little bit about dependent arising. As I mentioned a short while ago, it's said to be the king of reasonings because it avoids what are called the two extremes. The extreme of permanence is where we are adhering to that view of a inherently existent I and thinking that it's going to abide on, that there's some sense of permanence or eternalism, some existence that goes beyond what is actually there. This is kind of the extreme that we are all in to some degree right now, because we are clinging to a false sense of a self in regard to the person that we are, as well as all phenomena, that is inherently there. That is, it's got its own identity. It's able to set itself up from its own side. It exists substantially, objectively. All these are the terminology that's used to refer to that sense of inherent existence. Another way we could talk about it is existing independently, on its own, setting itself up. The extreme of annihilation is when we are either thinking that that inherently existent I exists, but it is going to be dying at the end of this life, that there will be nothing beyond this life, or we learn, excuse me, or in this context, it's more the idea that we learn about emptiness and we think that that is getting rid of any sense of an I. So in that way, there's annihilation. So that when we kind of realize emptiness, we are negating together with that intrinsic or inherent existence, any mode of existence of the I. Of course, in this context, then, we have to avoid that extreme. We can't come to see that the meaning of emptiness is that things don't exist at all, because that will cause the extreme of annihilation. But we have to go far enough in defining what we mean by emptiness so that we make sure we negate anything that would keep us clinging to the extreme of permanence, keep us thinking that there is a real I that goes from life to life, that is intrinsically there, that is existing from its own side. So these two extremes are the dangers that we have, the two precipices that we could fall into if we don't find that middle way between these two. Dependent arising is said to be the main reasoning that helps us to get that middle way, to that point of view that will not allow you to fall into either one. So I've talked about this topic many times, so I won't spend too much time on it, but there are three levels of dependent arising that one should be using in one's analysis of things. The first level, as it says at the bottom there, is only applicable to conditioned phenomena, meaning those things that arise from causes and conditions. There are some things that exist that do not depend upon causes and conditions. One of them is emptiness. Emptiness itself does not have causes and conditions. What is the cause of emptiness? It is a negation. It is saying the I or the table or the computer or whatever basis doesn't exist inherently. It lacks inherent existence. Being a negation, it does not depend upon causes and conditions. Whereas the table, the computer, the person, all these other phenomena that are in our material world, certainly, or even in the world of consciousness, all of these things depend upon causes and conditions. They have things that came before them that cause them to arise. And of course, they act as causes for things that come afterwards. So there is a dependence upon causes and conditions at the coarsest level. But if we really understand the implications of this, we will see that it is pointing already to emptiness. But nonetheless, a lot of the lower schools of Buddhism do say, yes, things do depend upon causes and conditions, but that doesn't mean they lack inherent existence. It just means that's how things arise. So they treat dependent arising in a very different way. According to our school, which again is Prasangika Madhyamaka, the consequence middle way school, even this coarsest level of dependent arising is pointing to emptiness. Because if something depends upon causes and conditions, it cannot arise on its own. It cannot have any independent existence, any substantial objective existence. So again, if we talk about phenomena that are caused, I don't have my clothespin with me that I often use when I talk about this. Maybe I could find it real quick. I'm not sure where I have it though, but anyway, if we, let's just talk about something like, I've been using this bowl a lot. I did use this the other night in one of my teachings. Let's use this wrist mala that I sometimes play with. You might hear it when I'm teaching. So again, this wrist mala has causes and conditions behind it, right? Every one of these little beads, these are, I think, from a Bodhi tree. They were grown through that tree, and these seeds kind of, were harvested, and they were polished by somebody and whatever to make it into this. There's a string that goes through it. There's a little metal guru bead that the strings come through, what have you. All of the things that are causes and conditions that led to this being here, that produced the string, that produced the Bodhi seeds, that produced the person who put it together, that produced all the various things that are involved. All those causes and conditions give rise to this mala, this wrist mala. Without those causes and conditions, you cannot have a wrist mala. Therefore, it's a dependent arising. It depends upon those. The second level, let's go back to the slides, is the dependence upon parts. Again, this is applicable to all phenomena, even emptiness and those things that aren't produced through causes and conditions, that aren't conditioned. Since all phenomena have either spatial, kind of directional parts, which is kind of the physical world that we're in, or temporal parts. Meaning, like, you could talk about the emptiness of dawn right now, the emptiness of dawn in the next moment, the emptiness of dawn in the next moment. Those are temporal parts. It sounds kind of strange to call them that, but they are parts that are existing as long as we, have the emptiness of dawn. We have those individual moments of emptiness of dawn. So everything has parts. And so when we talk about the mala, of course, I was pointing out some of the parts and talking about their causes and conditions, but here we would just simply talk about the parts, the 21 beads that make up the majority of the mala, as well as the guru eye bead. And it's got a little holder for bringing the string through, the thread that goes through it, all of this. We have all these parts. Well, does there exist a wrist mala that is independent of those parts, that could exist over here without those parts? The wrist mala, which is the whole, that is the totality that we are referring to here, that whole depends upon the parts. You can't have the whole independent of the parts. Okay, so this is a little subtler, but nonetheless stuff that we can kind of agree with and go, yeah, I get it, I get it. But now we have to begin to look at things in terms of these parts here being the basis for the label of wristmala, for the designation of wristmala. And this points to the subtlest way that is only taught in Prasangika Madhyamaka, only taught in this highest view of the Buddha's teachings on emptiness or selflessness. And that's where we talk about dependence upon mere imputation or designation. And of course, this also is applicable to everything that exists, all phenomena. Even emptiness is merely imputed, merely designated. Okay, so again, in terms of this, what happens then is there's always a basis for something, which is actually what I have in my hand here. This is the basis for a wrist mala, which consists of the 21 beads and the little eye bead and the string and so on. And the label of mala is being given by my conceptual consciousness. It's a designation. And again, we are talking about words here in terms of mala, but mala is an idea. It's a construct. It doesn't require there to be language involved, but we obviously use language in the human realm to define things, to talk about things, to be able to relate to our world around us. So if we hadn't given this label of wrist mala to this, we wouldn't know what a wrist mala is. Somebody would say, oh, have you seen my wrist mala? And they go, I don't know what you're talking about. And maybe there are people that wouldn't know this because they wouldn't know what the word mala is. They might understand what wrist means, but they don't necessarily put them together into a full construct. For them, wrist mala doesn't exist yet until they learn on the basis of this base for wrist mala appearing to them and understanding a concept of wrist mala in relation to that. And so for like our pets, if this was, and actually my one cat that when sometimes I leave this on the bed and it gets at my mala, it starts to chew on the little ends here and what have you. So for a cat, this doesn't have the identification of wrist mala at all, right? It's a basis that appears to them that has this string and the beads and what have you that we've designated as well. But all of this appears to them as a toy. And my cat like starts chewing at it and wants to bat it around and throw it all over, and so I've got to be careful not to leave it on the bed. But anyway, the idea is that this is what happens in terms of beings. Something appears to them that is the basis for a concept, and then they label it through their conceptual designation. And so, of course, cats label some things as birds, some things as, bugs, some things as whatever, but they don't use that language, but they still have a concept for what those things are. My cats will sit at the window looking outside at all the birds in the tree and making weird noises because they would love to be out there playing with them and probably killing them. But anyway, the idea is that this is how the world comes into existence, is that in the end, there is nothing that exists from its own side. There is no wrist mala in my hand in reality. Wrist mala is a label I give to this based on my human experience and my human definition of what we mean by wrist mala. And again, a pet, a cat or a dog would have a very different experience of this. Eloise and Adrian's new puppy would have a totally different experience, right, than my cat even. It probably would chew this to death, So this is, again, speaking to the fact that there's nothing that exists from the side of the object or, what we have designated. There's no real wrist mala, which is what my mind thinks. That's what ignorance is grasping to. The process that Rinpoche talks about as to how our ignorance arises is that we have a basis that appears to us. We learn the label. That's the very first step. The label of Vrismala is given to this. Then there is an appearance as if Vrismala was all encompassing this entire thing, like covering it. And that appears back to us through the force of our deep ignorance that we've had since beginningless time. We have these imprints for a false appearance. This was alluded to in our verse, that things have this illusory nature. They appear to be inherently existent. Ristmala seems to be existing out here on its own on this basis. That's the second step. First step, I label it. No problem there. If we stopped there, everything would be hunky-dory. The problem is it appears back to us as if it's established out here. And then the third step, I agree to that appearance. I assent to that appearance. I believe in that appearance. And I've never questioned that appearance, of course, and no one will until they meet the Buddha's teachings that asks you, invites you to question how things appear and versus how they actually exist. So there's this contrast between appearance and reality. Things appear to inherently exist, appear to have their own nature from their own side, self-established, substantially existent, and so on. But they lack that in their entirety, not an atom of that. And we have been agreeing to that and reinforcing that ignorance since beginningless time. And on the basis of that ignorance that is specifically attached to this sense of an I that we think is really here, a real I, whereas the I too is empty of inherent existence, it's only a designation being given to this collection of stuff. We have gotten into unbelievable trouble and suffering since beginningless time because of that ignorance. In order for us to become a Buddha, we first have to remove that ignorance and all of the things that are the basis of that ignorance. And then eventually we can remove these subtle imprints that are causing that false appearance, that appearance of things to exist from their own side. That's the final barrier for becoming a Buddha, is removing those subtle imprints that give forth what we call a dualistic appearance, an appearance as if things had their own substantial inherent existence. that again, you can first remove the conception believing that, but you then have to also remove that false appearance. Because that false appearance isn't happening out here on this object, it's happening in our minds. It is appearing to our minds. It is illusory in that regard. It seems to exist in that way to our minds, but we can learn, first of all, that it doesn't exist that way and remove the ignorance, and then eventually remove what is causing that false appearance. So this is a kind of in a very short teaching, everything that we're dealing with here in terms of selflessness and what we need to realize in terms of emptiness to undermine this process by which we are continuing to suffer ourselves, but moreover, incapable of becoming enlightened and benefiting others. And the reasoning of dependent arising is the way to get there. There are other reasonings, of course, that we use that I won't go into as part of this course, which include the four-point analysis and the sevenfold reasoning of Chandrakirti and the production from the four extremes and all these various things that the Buddha taught. And it's good to become familiar with all those techniques of realizing emptiness. But the king of reasonings, the crown jewel of reasonings, is dependent arising, because dependent arising helps you to understand that, okay, we have the extreme of permanence over here. Things cannot be permanent, existing independently on their own, self-established. Why? Because they are dependent. That first part of dependent arising negates any possibility of hanging out over here. If things are dependent, they cannot be independent. Then talk about the other extreme of annihilation, of saying things don't exist at all. Well, that's negated by the second part of dependent arising, which is arising. They arise, they exist. If things arise and exist, they can't be utterly non-existent. The Buddha never said things don't exist at all. You don't exist, I don't exist, nothing exists, That would be a pretty kind of dismal teaching at some level. Guess what, folks? Nothing exists. Things do exist, but they exist in the fact that they arise in a dependent manner, undependence upon their causes and conditions, their parts, and in the end upon mere imputation, mere designation. So this is such an important teaching that we have to, realize. And what's being told to us here in this very first verse of this section that we're in right now is that we have to realize this through dependent arising. So I wanted to point out two verses from Nagarjuna before we go to Geshe-la's commentary. These are really important verses in terms of understanding the extent to which dependent arising and emptiness end up being equivalent. They're pointing to the same fact. Whatever is dependently originated, whatever dependently arises, that is explained to be emptiness because it lacks any independent existence, right? That, being a dependent designation, is itself the middle way. The middle way between these two extremes is to understand that emptiness and dependent origination or dependent arising are pointing to the same fact, just coming at it from two different angles. One is coming at it from how do things actually exist in dependence upon all these factors. The other one is saying, what do they lack? How are they lacking any independent existence? When we hear it in those words, that dependent arising and lack of independent existence, these seem totally compatible. But nonetheless, we have to work on seeing them as pointing to the same reality, pointing to the same truth. That which is not dependently originated, such a thing doesn't exist. Therefore, that which is not empty, such a thing also does not exist. Because everything is dependently originating, everything is empty of inherent existence. There is no phenomenon that exists whatsoever that is not empty of inherent existence. So this gets into this, that goes into the next verse. So when we talk about this idea of emptiness and dependent arising being completely compatible, this again, we have something we have to continually work on because we still see them somewhat as contradictory. That's because we have such a strong adherence to the object of negation, to thinking that things actually exist intrinsically, inherently. And that's also because that's how they appear to us. Again, it appears that there's a real mala in my hand, that reality seems to be established on that basis. We don't get the very subtle way that exists in dependence upon all these factors, especially my merely designating it as a mala. So this again is just a brief teaching on emptiness. We'll talk more about emptiness as we go through these verses. But let's go to what Geshe Jampa Gyatso says in regard to this verse 104 that led us into this discussion. Let me repeat the verse just so we kind of tie it back in with what we were talking about. Aha, all these are dependent relations. Everything is a dependent arising. And everything we've talked about in this text, self-cherishing, self-grasping, everything is a dependent arising. Dependent arisings or relations are dependent and not self-sustaining. They don't establish themselves. They don't exist on their own. Changing back and forth, they are illusory false appearances. They appear to exist independently, but they do not. And then this idea of like a whirling firebrand. If you've ever been out at night, or even at, like on 4th of July when we were kids, we'd have sparklers, right? And you could like take the sparkler and like make a circle in the sky before you, and people would see a circle, right? You see what looks like a circle, but it's not really a circle. It's the individual points of the light that are making it appear like a circle because of the quickness with which you're rotating the sparkler in the sky. So the idea is that this is kind of something that appears to be a real circle, but it's not a real circle. It's actually the individual points, again, of that firebrand as we're making the circular motion. They are also like reflections that appear. This is going to come up in the next verse. This is another analogy that's used for how things can appear to be real, like the reflection of a face in the mirror, but it doesn't exist as a real face. It is only the reflection of a face. So let's see what Geshe says on this. He says, having called out to ourselves, aha, all of them, the self-grasping and self-cherishing explained above, as well as the self that is the object that is grasped to be most important by self-cherishing and to be inherently existent by self-grasping, all three of these, self-grasping, self-cherishing, and the I or the self that is the basis for those, are also dependent relations because they are established in dependence on a mere collection of causes and conditions. As I said, even that coarsest way that many of this, all the Buddhist schools will agree with, that things do depend upon causes and conditions. They don't see it as merely imputed in the context of that things therefore can't have any independent existence. So then it says another reason that all phenomena are dependent relations is from the point of view of their not being self-sustaining, due to their being established in dependence on either the causes and conditions or their parts, and so forth. So again, so forth meaning including mere designation, mere imputation. Nothing exists on its own independently. It depends upon all these factors, but in the subtlest way, independence upon mere designation, mere conceptualization, imputation. Geshe goes on, he says, the way in which they are not self-sustaining should be understood with regard to all phenomena through the illustration of, for instance, a parent and a child existing in dependence on each other. Can you designate someone as a parent without them having a child? Can you designate someone as a child without them having had a parent? No, these are mutual dependence. You cannot establish one as being independent from the other. In this way, Geshe says, because phenomena are not established as self-sustaining, they are able to change entity back and forth in all sorts of ways. For example, when the sky in front of us is now obscured by clouds, it appears to us as though it were gloomy. And for the time being, we also identify it as gloomy, right? If it's a dark day, we don't get that many of those in New Mexico as other parts of the country, perhaps, where the sky gets completely black and gray and what have you. In the summer, it happens here and there. But anyway, for the time being, we see it as gloomy, right? We identify it as that. Then Geshe says, whoops, I didn't want to do it quite that much. Wanted to get to the, whoops, there. Okay, let me move this down a little bit. Didn't mean to do that, sorry. So that last sentence of that paragraph, but after the clouds disperse, the sky is the opposite to what it was before. It becomes sunny again. This is the nature of things. They can change, they can transform because they don't have any inherent or independent existence. If they were inherently existent as what they appeared, they would never change. They would never be able to transform. Thus, just as the sky is able to change back into an entity free from clouds, phenomena, aside from being merely imputed by name and conception as this and that situation, are not established on the object. Instead, they are objects that are illusory, like false appearances. Just as when a firebrand, or again a sparkler or whatever, but yeah, if you were camping and you had like a log or a stick that was in the fire and you pulled it out so it had that burning ember at the end of it, and you spun it really quickly, whirled it in midair. Geshe says then, a circle of burning red fire appears, by the force of a later instant being conjoined without a break after a previous instant as the object of the eyes. But in reality, it does not exist. There is no circle of fire existing there. There's simply, again, those individual moments of whirling the firebrand in the sky. So, likewise, all phenomena that are causes and results appear while not being established on the object. They appear to be established out there on their own, but they don't exist in that way. They cannot be established as existing from their own side. This is the meaning of dependent arising or dependent relations, being like the reflection of a whirling firebrand. Again, reflection may not be quite the translation here. I took it in the verse earlier when we looked at it as being referring to the idea of reflections as well, which are said to be another analogy that we're going to see in the next verse. But nonetheless, yeah, reflection of a whirling firebrand, maybe the image of a whirling firebrand that is imprinted on the eyes on the basis of that movement that is quickly done before you, that gives the impression of there being a circle when there actually isn't a circle of fire. So, all right, let me go on to this next verse. Actually, let me stop here and do some questions, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to even make it through all of that next verse. It's got like 6 different parts. I think maybe even 7, maybe perhaps 7 different parts. Any questions on what I've talked about so far, especially this last little bit on dependent arising and emptiness? Again, I know many of you have heard these teachings before, but it is important that we come to understand that this is actually a really powerful way to realize emptiness. We can't sort of hang out in that idea of just observing conventional things and how they exist in that way, but we have to really see the implications of that. If we get that there is only a merely imputed I here, well then, if we, again, you have to do this through repeated reasoning and what have you. You have to get to a place where that level of reality that we've been so invested in is completely negated, because we see that the very subtle way that the I exists is simply through designation. And yet we've been doing all the actions throughout our lives with the force of thinking there's something more than that, something realer than that. Again, that's why Rinpoche very frequently calls that sense of an I a real I, because that's how we see reality, is we imbue it with a sense of everything having its objective existence. But if we come to see that they're merely imputed, merely designated, that means that there is no real I here in the way we think there is. The I still exists, but again, it's, as Rinpoche often points out, it's almost as if the I doesn't exist. And we have to be able to get to that place of seeing the import of that. So oftentimes I encourage people to work with dependent arising to kind of keep you from, falling into any sort of extreme of annihilation, by really getting how the very subtle way that things exist, but then accompanying it with something like the 4-point analysis, which I'm not going to go into as part of this course, but you've got many resources to examine that. Every Lam Rim book in the Perfection of Wisdom special insight section goes into the 4-point analysis, where we identify the object of negation. We determine the ways that I, if we think it's inherently existent, the ways it would exist. And we determine that there are only 2. It's either going to be the same as the mind-body complex or completely different from the mind-body complex. And we cannot find it to exist in either of those ways. So we can do that kind of analysis that gets us to the place of emptiness, that place of not finding what we think is actually there. But then we come back to dependent arising to realizing, yes, in spite of that not finding, things still do exist, but it's almost as if they don't exist. And then we go back to emptiness and we realize, again, want to negate that so that we make sure we aren't clinging to any sense of inherent existence. But then we want to make sure we haven't fallen into the extreme of utter, non-existence. So, okay, if there are no questions, I will go on and do a little bit more on this verse so we can at least begin it. Any questions? Anyone? Okay. Let's keep plunging then into this. Let me pull up the slides. I tried to find a nice little image for each of these lines. Again, there are several of these. I wanted to say 7. I think it was 7 different analogies that are used in this verse 105. 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's 6 actually. Sorry. For some reason, I had 7 in my mind, but yeah, there's 6 of them. The first one, in our translation, it says like a banana tree, but the more common translation is a plantain tree. There's some difference between the bananas and the plantains. I think plantains are a little bit larger sometimes, but maybe the trees are different. But the idea behind this type of tree is that when you go kind of searching for what is a real sort of solid established trunk of this in terms of the tree or the bush or whatever you want to call it, you don't find any sort of core to it. You don't find anything that's sort of solid within it, which is pointing once more to this idea of emptiness. And here the analogy is saying that it's like a banana tree in terms of our life force being essenceless, that this is also pointing to the transitory nature of our lives and of our bodies, and coming to see that that is due to their emptiness, that things do change, and we do have death and impermanence in our lives because of emptiness. So let's look at this first one. Like a banana tree, our life force is essenceless. The trunks of trees that contain water, regardless of how strong they may seem, are utterly without essence in that they collapse due to the slightest condition by the force of being consumed by the water inside them. So again, the idea here is that when we talk about this type of a plant, it has some moisture that is sort of holding it all together, but we don't find that that really is able to be something that is concrete that we can look at and identify. It seems so strong and self-supporting, but it can be rotted from the inside out. The sort of moisture within it can actually cause the plant to completely degenerate, which of course is pointing to it not having that solid basis that we would like to point to a trunk of a tree and think that it's absolutely solid there and will always be there. So the conclusion is, again, similarly, since our life force also deteriorates due to a mere slight condition like that, it too is essenceless. This is pointing to the fact that all things that are impermanent, which of course includes all those things that have causes and conditions, are by their very nature lacking inherent existence. Because if they depend upon those causes and conditions and they change because of various causes and conditions, such as the rot that is happening within a plantain tree, or uh, the coronavirus that is infecting us and causing problems with our body, and for some people causing the complete deterioration of their life force, this is due to the emptiness of these phenomena. They don't have any inherent essence, or they would remain the same. Let me go back to the slides. I think there's a question perhaps coming up. They're not trees, herbs, and related to ginger. Yeah. So this is where they're called trees, but again, I don't know much about them. I've never really picked them apart, but even if you look at the picture that I had up here, I think you can see that there's this sort of like nature to the tree that is not really, again, anything substantial. It seems like it's a solid trunk, but as John's pointing out, I mean, it's really not in the same nature as what we often call trees. So it's an example that is used sometimes to refer to that not having a sort of solid core, not having an unchanging essence to it, which is again similar to our own life force. Let's go on to the other one that might be a little easier to work with. That's like a bubble. Our life is without essence. So bubbles, I put a number of them on the screen there. Any sort of a water bubble that's forming on the surface of water, or a bubble like this that is made from, dish soap and water. These bubbles have a very transitory nature, right? They come into contact with the surface and sometimes they immediately pop. They don't have any ability to be sustained. So this is also, once more, an analogy that has to do with impermanence. And impermanence points to emptiness. They're not equivalent. If you realize impermanence, you don't necessarily realize emptiness. But things can only change within the context of emptiness. Impermanence couldn't be there if things had their own intrinsic existence, their own essence. So this first full paragraph that's on the screen. For example, although at the moment a water bubble appears as though it will stay, if it is merely touched by a finger and so on, it will be destroyed. Similarly, although on the occasion in which the conditions for our death have not been met with, our life appears as though it too will stay. Nonetheless, it will perish due to a mere slight condition for death. Again, something like coronavirus or cancer or what have you. Therefore, because it is not able to abide for long, it is without any intrinsic essence. That is, it is not established from its own side. Again, things that are impermanent, that change, that actually can go out of existence, cannot be intrinsically existent, or they would abide in that state forever. These are the consequences that we would see if things actually existed in the way that they appeared, if they existed in the way that we mistakenly think of them existing. Let's go on to the third one. Maybe we can get through another couple of these. Like mist, things dissipate when touched. So the idea that was in Geshe-la's commentary that we'll get to is like mist in a valley, but it was kind of hard to find one that wasn't equivalent to the last of these analogies. It's about like clouds and fog. If you've been around a waterfall or something where there's mist, you may feel the mist, the spray of it when you go into it, but there's nothing really substantial about it, if you will. It kind of looks like it's this white, creation as it's on the screen there. But that's all just, again, an appearance to us on the basis of a number of water droplets that have all been amassed in the space before us. So when mist is seen from far away, Geshe-la says, it appears as though it exists. But when it is touched close up, it becomes inexistent. Or maybe it's Venerable Thupten Chodron's book that talks about it being mist in a valley. Similarly, when things are also not investigated and not analyzed, they seem to be really existent. But when they are investigated and analyzed, like mist when touched close up, they are objects that simply dissipate. They don't have any, again, substantial existence. This is what we have to do, of course, is to analyze all those things that appear so substantial around us, to come to see them as they really are, that they cannot sustain themselves, that they have none of that ability. No self-sufficiency or self-existence. Let's go to do one more, D, like a mirage. This is a very common one that's used in Buddhism. So I found a little picture of a mirage. It appears that there's water there, right? That's a sort of lake in front of these mountains that are on the horizon. Like a mirage, they're beautiful from a distance, but they're not real. You get up to them and there's no water there. Even that looks like a nice pool of water, especially if you were out in the desert, here in southern New Mexico or something, and wanting to find water so that you could cool down. So for example, that known as a mirage, which is produced from the collection of the three, a very hot sun, pale colored sand, and the eye consciousness of a being, during summertime is perceived as real water. But when we arrive near to where we saw the water, we find that not even a single drop exists. Nonetheless, when it was viewed from a distance, it appeared as though it were really beautiful. And we thought, does a great river run there? Is that a watering hole for all the desert animals? Similarly, the phenomena that are causes, conditions, and so forth, when analyzed, also are found to not be established by their own entity. But when posited as mere appearances without being analyzed, they are objects that appear to be beautiful, as though they were really true. One thing that Venerable Thupten Chodron points out in her analysis of these 6 examples is that this is kind of the way that these objects of attachment delude us. This is on page, she covers these on 226 through 228, and you might take a look at that if you do have her book, Good Karma. She says here, feeling thirst when traveling through a desert, we see a mirage. We rush toward it thinking that water is there, but find only sand. We are equally beguiled by the pleasures of psychic existence, believing these seemingly desirable things to be truly existent and doing whatever is necessary to obtain them. We are sorely disappointed when they disappear due to their impermanent nature, or when they fail to fulfill our craving due to their being unsatisfactory by nature. This is again the suffering of change, right? That things appear to be, pleasurable by their nature, but they really aren't pleasurable. We thought that they had an abiding essence of happiness, but they do not. So again, we can apply some of these understanding of these examples to things in our life that we can begin to not be so attached to. If everything that is an object of our various delusions we look at from the point of view of it being like a mirage, like a mist, like a plantain tree or whatever, plantain bush, these are ways that we can begin to loosen some of that. In fact, there is a whole set of examples that the Buddha used in various sutras. Some of you are familiar with the one that we recite sometimes. It's from the Vajracutter Sutra. In fact, there's a book, actually, get it, it's right up here on my shelf, that's called 12 Examples of Illusion. It's kind of nice to go through and understand the various things that the Buddha used: lightning, clouds, a dream. A dream is one of them that I often use, because a dream has that ability. When we have a dream object, when we wake up, we see that it didn't exist in the way that it appeared in our dream at all. It doesn't mean it didn't exist, because a dream object did exist, and a dream object can even cause us to have fear, attachment, whatever arising. But it's not real in the way that it appeared. Seemed to be so real, but it doesn't exist that way at all. So we're going to do the remainder of these, the last two in that verse, that are like a reflection in a mirror, and cloud and fog. And when we return, and we'll finish off the text. I'm again feeling pretty confident that we'll make it through the remainder of these verses. I might not be able to talk as much about some of them as I did tonight, but any final questions or comments before? Okay. All right. So